I'm going to hit start recording. There we go. At this point, like I said, we've got our quadruped pretty far along. We've kind of done that first application of our subdivision mirror, and then we, of course, reapplied a mirror in a subdivision. That's all in the previous videos. And that gave us that extra geometry, which has allowed us to do more shaping. The base mesh itself actually is already going to look better. Remember, we're going to apply this one more time, but more towards the end when we've kind of got the model in pretty good core shape, right? So usually that second application of the subdivision surface modifier comes later in the process towards the end of the modeling process. Whereas the earlier one kind of comes early, right? It's kind of once you get the main body, legs on, head kind of form, that's when you say, hey, apply it, and then you can start to add the toes and the eyes and the mouth and all that stuff. And so much of this was just extruding polygons, right? And making sure to have the right polygons there, keeping them pretty linear, right? You can kind of see that linear form. That's one of the reasons why we waited until afterwards to kind of have that nice quad linear form, right? Remember, we love quads, right? Quads are our friend. Obviously, if it's a flat surface like the side of a building and you're using booleans to kind of cut stuff apart, you can get away with some n-gons. Even an occasional small triangle here and there, really a non-issue, right? It's much more, is it kind of in an area that's not going to see a lot of animation? Is it an area where the shape's going to work well with it? N-gons work pretty well on flat surfaces that never animate, like buildings, desks. You can kind of tend to get away with n-gons there. Of course, you can always triangulate a mesh too, so it's not like you can't turn it into all triangles, because triangles are actually quite a reliable polygon. They're just not easy to model with. But we really like to have that strong quad bias, right? Generally, if you're working with quads, you're going to be a pretty happy camper, right? They're kind of the Goldilocks polygon, right? Not quite as predictable at deforming as triangles are, but certain modeling functions like adding edge loops, selecting edge loops, even be able to extrude to create appendage shapes is so much easier with quads. So quads is kind of like that sweet spot of almost as predictable as a triangle for deformation, but vastly easier to model with. Certain tools are built to work well with quads, right? They have a lot of predictability because of them. N-gons are usually the jerk polygon, right? Like, really, you can only use those in, like, really, really controlled cases, like it's the side of a wall, right? Where it's never going to change its shape, it doesn't have curvature, so you're like, if it looks good, it's okay, right? But we always like to have that strong quad bias, right? All right. So, really, we just want to create radial patterns now, right? We want to start to kind of get in here and create the eye and mouth shape, right? Now, some of this model we're actually going to do some multi-res sculpting on even before we get to the detailing phase later on, because I want to do some interesting primary forms that are going to be a little bit harder to box model. This is kind of my patent pending technique where I box model as much as I can, and then I take a quick sculpt pass on primary forms for the stuff that's a little trickier to box model, and then we can actually retopo that, right? So we're going to get to see some retopologizing sooner than later. We're also going to use the retopo tools for building some armor, saddle, gear for this creature as well. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be cool. But we still have a bit more box modeling to do, right? I always kind of try to get arms, legs, fingers, toes, any horns or large ear shapes, any big primary form that I know I can box model fairly easily, I box model that, right? And that even includes the eye and the mouth, right? So, remember, extruding is going to create this radial pattern, though, and we'll get to talk a little about what the radial pattern actually is. So in this case, I'm going to just hit Q. Remember, I have these set to quick keys, right? I've got them set to my mouse buttons. You know, like mouse button 4 is tweak, mouse button 5 is circle. At home, I have them both on the left side, which I like better than the ones we have here that kind of have the mouse buttons on either side. But remember, Q toggles you through those as well. So remember, Q does that nice toggle through all your kind of major selection types: rectangle, circle, lasso, right? Which is just kind of like rectangle, but it's a lasso, right? And then, of course, tweak. So I want circle select on because it makes it a little easier to select these. So I'm just going to grab, say, like these, go to 3 for face mode, of course. I'm going to select these 2 polygons right here. And to create a radial pattern, of course, you can extrude, but remember, Blender has the Inset tool. And remember, Inset's basically an extrusion, but instead of moving it out, it scales it in. So it actually creates the same kind of exact geometry structure an extrusion would, but instead of allowing you to move it out somewhere to grow a leg or a horn or toes off, it just scales it, right? So in this case, I'm actually going to use inset, but it's basically, inset's just a variation on the extrude. So remember, of course, extrude's right here, but right below it is inset faces, and there's actually a good quick key already default for that, I, right? I for inset. So if I hit I for inset, and then I middle mouse drag, you'll see it creates new geometry, and depending on which way you go, it kind of makes it bigger or smaller. Make it a little smaller there. So you'll see that that inset kind of already starts to create that basic form for us. Now at this point, I'm maybe going to do one more inset just to give me a little more geometry. And then I'm going to do an extrusion. Control E for extrude. Middle mouse button to kind of drag that in. Now, those polygons I don't really need on the inside anymore. So remember, if you hit delete, I can just delete faces, right? I'm going to go back to my tweak tool, right? Because now you see I can go in here and I can shape this. Probably go to 2 for edges. And you see I can actually come in here and start to shape this form a lot better, right? So I can actually start to come in here and really kind of develop a little bit more of kind of the eye brow ridge here, right? So this inset and extrusion is going to give you your kind of core starting point for your geometry. But as you can see, we do have to kind of come in here and do some shaping to it. You're always going to have to shape, right? Remember, your tweak tool makes this a lot faster and easier, right? You can just left-click drag to move stuff. And then it's just switching between your selection types, like 2 for edges, 1 for vertices, right? But you'll notice that if I go in here, say to 2 for edge mode, and I double left-click, right? You see how that selects this edge loop? I'll shift double left-click on this one. And you see these edge loops kind of go around in kind of an oval or circular pattern. And you'll see kind of these edge loops kind of radiate out from the center, like rays from a sun or something like that. This is your radial pattern. That's the pattern we're talking about that is quite common for eyes and mouths, right? Not only does it do a good job of actually mimicking that kind of circular oval shape that eyes and mouths have, and that's not exactly perfectly true for what the shapes are, but it's close enough. But it also generally is going to work well for the movement of your eyes blinking and your mouth moving and stuff like that. So the nice thing is actually creating your eye and mouth edge loop patterns is quite easy, right? You actually already know the tools for it, and it's just understanding that you kind of want that shape to be a more pronounced circular edge loop pattern shape. So quite easy to start to make your, and now remember, this is the eyelid area, right? This is not meant to be your eyeball itself, right? The eyeball is going to be a separate object. But it is meant to be kind of a nice little kind of circular opening. We can kind of course, bring the brow ridge out a little bit more there if we want to. You know, and of course, you can keep doing shaping. Maybe make the kind of eye look angry, right? He's an angry rhino. So remember, you can kind of keep doing all this little shaping as you go just to kind of get some nice little quick adjustments to it. That should work pretty well for us for right now. We could always keep adjusting the shape as we go, right? But we're now starting to kind of understand the basic idea of radial patterns, right? And how those work. Usually the shape comes out a little bit, so I'll kind of round these off a little bit there, and maybe some of these can kind of come in a little bit. There we go. Kind of give a little bit of dimensional depth to this, right? You don't really want the shapes totally flat, right? You want them to kind of have some nice natural roundness, not only from this view, but also very much kind of from even this view, right? So remember, you're just kind of rotating your camera around to kind of get that stuff taken care of. Now, our mouth is also going to be a radial pattern. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. Now, in this case, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select face, and then I'm going to shift left click on a face on that same loop, right? Because remember, if you go up to the select menu, there is, in the select length, shortest path, right? This is a tool we've seen before. I've mentioned it before. It does not have a default quick key, but I find it super useful and use it all the time. So I absolutely recommend you guys assign your own quick key to it. Now, I have it kind of over with X, right? That's because we use industry compatible, so we don't use those for our manipulators, which I just think is dumb. That's why I use industry compatible. I think it's just better than the default Blender stuff in general. But shortest path is something I use all the time, and it's over where your hand's already at, right? Your left hand is already over by Shift, Control, Alt, Control Z. So as many quick keys as you can put in that small little cluster on the left hand is great for muscle memory, right? So that's one of the reasons why I changed spacebar for select length. I use it all the time too. I don't want to go all the way to right bracket, right? That's why I love QWERTY, W-E-R. It's all right there, super easy to get to muscle memory, right? So kind of just keep that in mind, but it is select linked, shortest path. And what it does is it just kind of selects in between those two faces. So I select these faces to kind of be the start and the end to kind of a path, and it selects in between those. Now you'll notice that, of course, if this was like more of a humanoid character, you would just extrude kind of a couple of these on the front, because we have kind of a flat mouth that would be right about here. But animals tend to have snouts, don't they? So their radial pattern's actually elongated. It wraps around the side also. So if this is a humanoid character with more of a humanoid mouth, you'd really just kind of have, probably just, those faces. But because this is an animal, that kind of snout structure, you should extend that radial pattern further back. Now, of course, I'm going to use Inset to start this off. So I for Inset, middle mouse button to start it up. Now remember, because of the mirror, you're going to have this. Here's what's really cool, though. All right, so because of this, now, believe it or not, I've gotten to know Blender quite well, but I still actually occasionally find stuff. I use Inset all the time, but believe it or not, if you go to the Inset Faces option, right, technically, guys, I'm still learning Blender. I've gotten to know it quite well, but I still occasionally pick up some stuff. Believe it or not, Inset Faces actually has an option called Boundary. And if you uncheck this, you see how Inset will actually properly kind of stay together along the clipping mirror. So when you're doing Inset for like the mouth in particular, remember that you can actually go to the Inset Faces option and uncheck Boundary. Uncheck it, right? It's good to have it on by default, but like in an instance like this, turn it off. And that's actually going to be a really cool way to kind of start to get that mouth. Now I'll do an extrusion. Control E for extrude, middle mouse button to kind of drag it in a little bit. W for move to move it in a little bit there. And then if I could do another extrusion, Control E, middle mouse button, kind of bring this back. W for move, middle mouse button, bring it in. Now this one, I'm going to actually delete also. So delete, faces, give us a proper opening there, and we can do some more shaping inside of there. But once again, you'll see that we have kind of a good core radial pattern started there. And you can already see the mouth taking form. So, believe it or not, character creatures in terms of kind of core edge structure are actually quite straightforward and easy, right? What's harder, much like the car, is shaping, right? Shaping a desk or a building is pretty easy. It's boxes, right? Even a lamp is kind of a nice cylindrical shape. When you get to things like cars and characters, creatures, the shapes are more dynamic, more complicated. There's a lot of curvature. So what's actually going to be more tricky for you guys when you're building this is the shaping. And that's why I kind of spend some time talking about shaping here, right? You notice I've kind of talked about kind of making the shapes irregular, right? You don't have to go photoreal with this stuff, but still bringing in kind of thinned out parts, thicker parts, like they would be reasonably on animals, really helps to kind of give it a believability, even if it's more stylized, right? So now I've got that radial pattern started there, and we can easily just, go to, tweak mode, 2 for edges, and I can easily start to bring these edges up in more to kind of create that mouth shape a little bit better for us. And you can start to see how this all starts to come together for us to create exactly what we're looking for in terms of our forms, right? So this gives us that kind of nice starting radial pattern. You can easily kind of bring these up to kind of create more shape, right? Tweaking them in. That guy can come up a little bit more. Even these areas, if you wanted to, you can kind of bring these in. Remember, double left click to select an edge loop, W for move, and you can kind of bring this down a little bit, and then go back to your tweak tool. And you can easily just kind of grab some of these things and just kind of adjust that shape better to fit closer to what you want it to be. Now, of course, we could add a loop in here. Alt-C for loop cut, right? We could kind of add. And you notice that these radial patterns are self-contained, right? You see when you go to add an edge loop here, they will go around just that area. So once you kind of create, by using inset and extrusions, these radial patterns, they're self-contained. If you add edge loops to them, they will not go around the whole entire model. They'll just stay kind of in that loop area. So you don't always have to add like 40 extrusions to get enough to get good shape. Start with like, 2 or 3 insets extrusions, shape it a little bit, and then if you need an extra loop or two, you can always use loop cut, right? Alt-C for loop cut. We could drop that in. And now we have that little bit of extra stuff that we can work with. See, I can kind of bring these out a bit more. And that just gives us that much more to kind of define the shape with as we work. So we kind of keep working with that shape until we get pretty happy with what we want. These could come in to sharpen that up a little bit. That could come down. So it just gives us that extra little bit to kind of add a little bit more nuance to the shapes and forms. Start to bring those in to kind of define this a little bit more if we wanted. And now all of a sudden you'll see we kind of have that good starting point for our eyes and our mouth. Now, we're not going to quite put the eyeball in yet. We'll do that tomorrow, and I'll actually show you 2 different ways to do it. The old-fashioned way where we can just create a cursor kind of right in that area and then just drop a sphere in. But there is, in Blender 2.92, this new add primitive feature, which is actually pretty neat. And so I want to kind of show you both of those options, but seeing as it's already kind of towards the end of our lecture, this will be a great place to stop anyways with kind of our core radial patterns, right? So those edge loops that kind of wrap around kind of in like that elongated oval circular shape. It's a great place to stop there because we get the concepts out for you guys, show you that just extrude and inset will get you there quite easily. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording and upload this for you guys, and then like I said, we'll kind of take some time tomorrow to kind of finish up, do a few other things. All right,